Yeah, good afternoon. We welcome you to this event for the Dublin Climate Action Week, our first Dublin Climate Action Week. And this event is for the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. We're going to start now shortly, and my name is Marianne Harris, and I'm working with Dublin Caro for the Dublin Metropolitan Region, and I'm delighted to be the moderator of this event. This is just one of over 75 events that are being held as part of the first Dublin Climate Action Week, and I'd urge you to check out our other events this week on www.dublinclimateactionweek.ie. The week has been organised and delivered by the partnership of Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council, South Dublin County Council, Dublin City County Council, Fingal County Council, and Codema, Dublin's Energy Agency, and the Dublin Climate Action Regional Office, CARO. The overall vision of the week is to highlight Dublin's climate action progress to its citizens and demonstrate the leadership role of the 4 local authorities in conjunction with their other partners. If you're tweeting about us, you can share our tagline, hashtag taking action together, and hashtag DCAW21. For those of you that don't already know, each local authority has a climate change action plan, and you can see them at the Dublin Climate Action Week website. And the link is going to be posted there to you in the chat. And we're going to be using the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen for asking questions. We would urge you to ask questions and ask them early so that we have time to put them to the panelists. We'll be leaving time towards the end for your questions. And the focus of today's lunchtime webinar is on how this initiative, the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, is important to climate change and why it's needed. And we're going to show you a few of the different people who are involved, both in the public sector and in the community sector. So I'm going to now introduce to you our speakers for today. Thank you, Lorna. So our first speaker is Dr. Una Fitzpatrick. She has a PhD in botany, and she worked on a project on the conservation of Irish bees before joining the National Biodiversity Data Centre in 2007. As senior ecologist, she is responsible for the plant, vegetation, and pollinator work programs of the centre. And then in 2015, she co-founded the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. She is now the chair of the steering group, and she also oversees implementation of the plan. So welcome today, Una.
Thanks, Marianne. It's lovely to be here.
Thanks. We also have Emer Fox with us. Emer is a senior landscape architect working at Transport Infrastructure Ireland. She has a particular interest in the equitable and sustainable design of streetscapes and landscapes along our transport routes. And recently she co-authored a guide for the pollinator-friendly management of transport corridors with the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. She's also an adjudicator for the National Tidy Towns competition. So welcome, Emer.
Hi, Marianne, thank you.
Thanks. Our third panelist today is Brian O'Neill. Brian is secretary of Temple Manor Wilkins Residents Association, which is in Green Hills, Dublin 12 in South Dublin. The association represents approximately 400 households, and they're currently involved in seeking to develop a community-based urban pollinator trail. So thanks for joining us, Brian.
Well, thanks for having me. Delighted to be here.
Thank you. And our final panelist for today is Charlie Heisman. Charlie worked his whole life in forestry, fishing, and farming sectors. And so, you know, he always had plenty of contact with the natural environment. And when he retired some 3 years ago, he and his wife developed a particular interest in bumblebees, and they started recording for the National Biodiversity Data Centre. And now they currently walk 4 transects each month and submit their records to the National Biodiversity Data Centre to inform the pollinator plan. And they're also heading up a plan locally in Skerries in North Dublin to protect the large carder bee, Bombus muscorum, a rare species. So we're going to learn more about this today from Charlie. Hi, Charlie.
Hello, everyone.
Thanks for joining us. So as I said, please give us your questions and any thoughts you have for our panelists. in the Q&A, and the Dublin Carrow office, I have Dave and Lorna with me here, keeping an eye on your questions. And we're going to try and get as many of them to the panelists as we can, or we'll answer them directly to you online. And you can actually vote for the questions to help us pick the ones of most interest to you. So without any further ado, I want to ask Una if she would like to give us her presentation on an overview of the plan.
Thanks, Marianne. I'll just try to share my screen so you can let me know if that looks okay. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks again to Caro for inviting me and for having this webinar on the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. You know, I work in the National Biodiversity Data Centre, and we've got amazing biodiversity in Ireland. You know, 31,500 different species. But I think we all know that biodiversity loss is a huge problem. But at the same time, it's hard to feel empowered to know what to do about that because it's so complex. But thankfully, you know, there are ways that we can simplify that message, and pollinators are a brilliant vehicle to explain wider biodiversity, you know, to a wider audience. So they're an element of biodiversity that people can understand and relate to. You can communicate about them in, you know, a clean and simple way. You can easily monitor changes in pollinators. And really importantly, when you protect pollinators, you're helping to protect biodiversity generally, because they're such an important part of our ecosystem. Unfortunately, as I think, you know, most of us know now, the plight of pollinators is typical of what's happening across biodiversity generally. And in Ireland, we've got 99 different bee species. So there's a honeybee that people are very familiar with that's kept by beekeepers. You know, that one's not in trouble. But then we have 98 wild bee species, bumblebees and solitary bees. And unfortunately, 1/3 of those are threatened with extinction from the island of Ireland. Also, we know from schemes, you know, like the one that you just talked about that Charlie and Marion participate in, the bumblebee monitoring scheme. We know from that scheme that the abundance of our common bumblebees has been declining since 2012. So really serious problems out there for pollinating insects. And those rare species are disappearing through loss of semi-natural habitats, but the common species are in trouble because of the way that we're managing the rest of the landscape. So I think if there's a problem, you know, what do you do? Well, you have to decide if it's important, you know, and assess how serious it is, identify what's causing it. And then it's really important that you've got a collective framework to try to address it. And that's what the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan is. So the first plan ran from 2015 to 2020, and we've just launched a new plan for 2021 to 25. When you have a plan, I think it's really important that you identify evidence-based actions that people can take to help, communicate them properly, you know, work together where you can, and then track progress, you know, is what you're doing actually working. So these are the 98 wild bees. As I said, 1/3 are in trouble. You can see, you know, gorgeous looking insects. And really, the beauty of the pollinator plan is that everyone can help. If you have some responsibility for a piece of land, from the smallest window box to the biggest farm, you know, everyone can take part and help. And it's about thinking about how your site can provide food, shelter, and safety. And the beauty of it is, you know, if you can do that for pollinators, you are helping to protect biodiversity generally. So it's all very well saying you want everyone to help unless you tell them, I think, what it is that you're asking them to do. So within the pollinator plan, we have been publishing these evidence-based guidelines for different sectors. Each time the sector feeds in, we try to tailor the communication. So those are all freely available on the website, pollinators.ie, you know, if people haven't seen them and then they want to have a look. Say the website, hopefully it's sort of a one-stop shop for people who want to help. You know, the guidelines are on there, but there's also videos and animations and flyers and all sorts of things to hopefully help people learn more if they want to get involved in the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. Just want to mention, there's lots of actions that you can take to help pollinators, but I often get asked, you know, well, what are the most important ones? So I want to tell you about 2 key actions really quickly. And there are 2 actions that if we took that would make all the difference. One is in spring. And I should say, actually, before I go into the actions, the main problem with pollinators is there's just not enough flowers in the landscape for them anymore. So hunger is the main driver. So there are 2 actions that we can help to try and address that. And both are about bringing back natural or semi-natural habitats into our landscape that have unfortunately been lost. So the first key action is in spring, and that's just to have more flowering native hedgerows and trees. So if we could have more trees and hedgerows that are allowed to flower, so that are managed so that they can flower in spring to provide food for pollinators, that would, you know, make a fantastic difference. Second action that's really important is to have more native meadows. So these will flower after the hedgerows. So the beauty of these 2 actions is that they go really well together. So hedgerows and trees in spring, and then native meadows, you know, in spring into summer. And that is really just where you don't cut the grass so often. You can see in that picture, you know, there's different grass cutting regimes, the path, is cut really regularly, that's like a desert for pollinators. But if you cut less frequently, just to allow simple wildflowers that are already in the soil bank a chance to grow, it's amazing. You know, you're providing food for pollinators, you know, and other biodiversity. I'm not going to stress this overly, but it's really, really important that don't mow that grow approach. It so really is the most cost-effective way to help pollinators. So just don't cut your grass so often, basically. You know, and it's simple things that pollinators need. They don't need anything fancy. You know, it's the dandelions and daisies and buttercups, clovers, the kind of things that will grow, you know, in most grassy areas if we just allow them to. So important for our pollinators. And that is a really important biodiversity action, because what you're doing there is you're sustainably returning that grassland habitat, and it's providing pollinators with the flowers that they need. Now, it takes a while to do this. You have to be patient. You know, once you stop mowing, it doesn't suddenly turn into this beautiful flower-rich meadow. You know, you have to be patient and give it time to return. And we do have lots of resources on our website that talk you through how to do that. Just quickly, I want to mention something that's related but very different, and that's the picture there. That is an ornamental meadow, and that's where you deliberately plant wildflower seed that you've bought. That's a totally different action. I just want to make the distinction between the two today. So when you plant wildflower seed, that's a horticultural action, and we would say, you know, please don't do that outside garden type settings, and never plant, you know, wildflower seed in situations where you could naturally allow those biodiversity habitats to return. And really, with that action, you know, you're growing a random mix of flowers. I see these mixes, you know, and they're very colorful, but you would never ever see those flowers growing together in nature. You know, they might not necessarily be native, and they mightn't necessarily be best for pollinators. And there's nothing wrong with doing it, but we would say just please, you know, be aware that it's a horticultural action and keep it within garden type habitats. And in a way, I think, you know, that one's providing us humans with what we like, whereas the native don't mow, let it grow meadows are providing pollinators what it is that they want. Just really quickly, some of the successes to date within the Pollinator Plan. You know, we've been so grateful for the support that people have shown across all sectors. So 80% of councils have agreed to take action. You know, there's actually 400 business supporters now. You know, hundreds of local communities have got involved. And we did produce this booklet, you know, to mark the end of the first phase. And if people want to have a look, it kind of just collates some of the successful things that have happened right across all sectors. Just to finish up, tell you a wee tiny bit about the new plan. So for 2021 to 25, first plan at 81 actions. They've lost the run of ourselves this time, gone for 186. But you know, it is nice to forge ahead and hopefully be more ambitious. Well, and we're going to talk about 186, Marianne will kill me. But just to give you a flavour of some of the things that we're going to do in this next plan, we want to continue providing hopefully best practice advice. We want to share the positive stories, and it's so good that this event is happening today, because that's exactly what we're doing, you know. And when we hear from Emer and Brian and Charlie, like they've got brilliant examples, you know, of success stories. And I think that's what it's about. It's about sharing and learning from their experiences. We want to expand to new sectors. So we've got some new guidelines in training, you know, housing and hospitals to start. We want to better explain the wider benefits of pollinator actions again, and it's so good to be part of this today, because we didn't do that, I don't think, properly in the first phase. And to just explain, you know, when you take action for pollinators, it's also helping climate, it's also helping human health and well-being. Identify sites that are decided to go pesticide free. And also we want to do more to protect rare pollinators, which is why it's fantastic to hear from Charlie later, you know, on the action that sustainable skerries are taking for the very rare large carder bee. So just to say to stop, you know, really it is so true that lots of small actions together can begin to solve big problems. I'll say thank you to Caro for their support of the Pollinator Plan and for organising this event today. And thank you.
Brilliant, Una, thanks. Lorna's just put a poll up there. Before today, did you get to read the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan? We'd love to hear from you. If you could give us your responses, be helpful for Una as well to get an idea of just how much reach she's got with it. And we're going to have Emer now give her presentation. So while you're finishing the poll, Emer, maybe if you want to put your slides up there.
Yeah.
Thanks. I know Emer's heard of it, so.
I am. Is that, can everybody see that?
I think, yeah, now I'm just waiting on a few more of you to vote. I think I'm waiting on 7 people. So I'm going to take the poll down in a few minutes. You want to get started there, Emer? And I can,
Hi everybody, my name is Emer Fox. I'm a landscape architect, and following on what Una has said about the Pollinator Plan, it's just been an amazing project to be involved in. And we I work for Transport Infrastructure Ireland, which encompasses national roads, motorways, and also the Lewis network. And we worked with Una in developing a sector-specific transport guide to really see how we could use our transport corridors as ecological corridors. So this was about 2 years ago, I think we did it, Una, and it was an All-Ireland guide, which was really important. So it encompassed all the transport agencies on the island, and there were 21 actions for pollinators that came out of the work we did in developing the transport guide. So one of the areas the stops that we looked at was on the Lewis line, which was Kilmacud stop. This was done about 4 years ago, and it's actually funny how thinking has changed. We have a very rich wildflower meadow there, but part of the thinking of putting it in was that we wanted to really use Kilmacud stop as a example of how transport corridors could be used as a pollinator habitat. So it was really as much for showcasing the possibilities. And if you look at the other side of the stop, we actually did very little on half of the stop, and we kept it very much in what would have previously been seen as maybe as an unkempt area, but recognizing the value of existing habitats to pollinators. But one of the really interesting things I think about the Pollinator Plan is that how it gets all of these sectors and individuals to do individual actions that all combine to make a bigger picture and a bigger benefit for biodiversities and a real nature-based solution issue. So for example, in Kilmacud, we had cleared some of the embankments to create bumblebee nesting sites. Just very simple action. We just didn't plant it, and we just left the earth bare, on the basis that within a kilometre of Kilmacud, we had a lot of other agencies and communities and local authorities who were doing their actions to provide food for our foraging bees. So for example, Lolly Park is within 1 kilometre of Kilmacud, and Dunir Radan is doing great work there implementing the council's actions. We then have schools within 300 kilometres or 300 metres of Kilmacud, which we're doing their bit. We have, you can see the extent of urban gardens within a kilometre of Kilmacud, and if even, you know, a small percentage of those gardens converted some of their planting to pollinator, it all adds up to the bigger picture. We also had local schools and local communities, and as Marianne said, I'm also an adjudicator in the Tidy Town, so I'm so aware of the incredible work that local communities do to implement the aims of the plan. So I think this is really, to me, is the benefits and the real ethos of the plan and why it works, is that all of us, no matter how small, as Una said, our actions all combine to create this network of foraging, nesting and habitat interventions, and that really is a nature-based solution in real terms, and it's been a great project to work on, and I'm looking forward to the discussion later on this morning or this afternoon.
Sorry, that's a really good example there, Emer, at Kimmage, and it shows how all the sectors can really take action under the plan. And I'm going to now, before we go on to the next speaker, we'll just share the results of our poll there. So Una, you might be happy with that, I think.
Sort of, Marianne. Yeah, there's 39 people to get at, though. 39% of the audience. Yep.
Yeah, well, they're here today, right? So
Exactly,
so they're in
exactly.
they're trying to get that information. So that's great. Thank you everybody for answering the poll. So now we're going to have another quick poll put up there. Lorna's going to put one up. This is more for us now in the local authorities in Carrow. We'd like to know, have you read the Climate Action Plan for your own area? So we appreciate the feedback, and maybe if I could get, then we'll get Brian's slides up there. Lorna, I think you have them. Okay.
Apologies, bear with me.
Yeah, no problem. Lorna's trying to do the poll and get Brian's slides at the same time. a few of you late voters can quick vote. Now, I think we've got 37 out of 40 have answered. Okay. So I'm going to end the poll now. Last second Okay. Okay, Brian, it's all yours.
Okay, thanks, Lorna, for putting that
Thanks.
up there. I'm Breen O'Neill. I'm the secretary of a local residents association up in Green Hills, and I think everybody would probably agree that the community in general has become more aware and more educated about climate and the need for climate action, about global warming and the need for tackling that. Biodiversity is one of the things that can be used as part of that. There was anything good to be said about COVID, I think it's the very fact that people in this country have been forced to use their local public park amenities, etc. We're lucky that we live beside quite a good park in South Dublin County Council, Timon Park. And the work that's been done by the council in Timon Park over the past 2 to 3 years has been absolutely fantastic. But more so the fact that people have used the park in the last 18 months in a way that they haven't used it before has created a situation where they've begun to look at the park through a new lens. So that what you're looking at there on the screen is what I would refer to as a boutique wild meadow, which is at the car park in one of the car parks in Timon Park. I'll come back to the idea of a boutique wild meadow, but the very fact that people have seen the park in this new light, there's been a major sort of positive reaction to what's happening in the park in terms of rewilding it. So grass has been cut on pitches, but nowhere else. And people have begun to actually engage with this whole thing of biodiversity and why we need to improve the biodiversity throughout the country. And as a residents association, what we set out to do was we tried to harness that, because we get feedback obviously from the residents in terms of the of what they're seeing around the place. If we can move on to the next slide, just to show you the estate that we live in and what we're actually looking at and what it is we're trying to do. Our estate is sort of split into two areas. That little triangle of houses you see is sort of separate to the main estate, but it borders onto Green Hills Park. And the two areas of interest would be that orange triangle area and the little yellow trail you see running along the side. Now, Green Hills Park, it's not a very big park. It has football pitches, there's a playground, there's gym equipment, etc. in it. But there's also a lot of underutilized space. So if you take, for example, that little orange triangle, it's used for nothing. So we've decided to come up with this idea of how do we engage as a community with our council to try and create something using both their property and our own gardens and our own community. So we have a proposal which would be to turn that triangle of grass into a wild meadow. Now, it won't be a wild meadow with wildflowers planted in it. It'll be exactly as Una was pointing out. Let nature do its course, let clovers and dandelions and everything else grow in it, and the grasses themselves. The yellow area, what we're hoping to do is create a trail along that of appropriate pollinating plants. Now, the reason I say appropriate is because we are talking about something that is being built or being created on public property. And there's an issue, obviously, for the public realm department in the local authority in terms of maintenance, etc. So, whilst we will get actively involved in maintaining this project, we have to be aware of what is appropriate, and we'll be guided by the council on that. If you can move on to the next slide, perhaps. The trail will continue, as you can see, along the side of the estate. Those houses that you see with the brown roofs, that's part of the estate. If you move to the next slide then, and you'll see the estate continues where we have a big park area in the middle, and that orange section at the end of one of those roads is a little small park area. So I'll come on to them now. most of the people in our estate want to contribute to the environment, but often people don't know how. They think, what is it that I can do? I can do very little myself, and they rely on others to do it. And that's quite understandable. People feel that, you know, that they're inept, and they don't know how to go about doing these things. And that's why we felt if we came together as a community, that we could create what we refer to as sort of education through action. And the plan that we have proposed is essentially to educate our neighbours, to educate our community, and action those particular things by creating this pollinator trail. We also hope that this project, which we're only beginning to sort of work on, that it's something that if it works, it can be rolled out easily in other urban areas where community is prepared to get involved and do things. So essentially, what we're saying is within our estate, with the help of our neighbours, we will reduce the mowing, we will create wildflower areas, but they will be limited. They won't be like that first slide you saw of the boutique wildflower. It will be things like clovers. We will try and put in something that'll look colourful, because obviously there has to be a visual benefit as well for the neighbours to try and engage with them. But we want ultimately to create a pollinator trail, and that's what this is about. So a lot of it is about rewilding parts of our estate. And one of the things we think is necessary in terms of doing that and getting the buy-in by the community is signage. It's very important that people understand when they see this area that it isn't a case of, oh, the grass hasn't been cut here. This has actually been actively managed. So the management is to actually do nothing, but that is part of the proposal. We want direct stakeholder engagement. So one of the things we have proposed in terms of this, and we've already set up contacts with our local schools, and there's quite a number of national schools and 2 secondary schools in this immediate area. And we're looking at the idea of having nature walks, etc., and talks for the students, so as to bring them into the process as well, that they understand about the need for pollinators, they understand about the need for climate awareness and environmental awareness within their own communities. And again, that this idea that the public have to get engaged, that without their engagement in this, we're leaving it up to others, and that's something that we can no longer afford to do. We have to do this ourselves. The other thing is our involvement with the local authority. That's essential, as I said, by virtue of the fact that we're doing stuff on their land, but we also want to engage with them so that we can provide seeds for residents that they can plant in their own gardens. And yes, these will be the boutique seeds that was shown in the very first slide. And the reason for that is because obviously people planting in their own garden, they want something nice to look at. But we need to make sure that whatever we're giving them is appropriate in terms of pollination, because obviously we want to attract bees and insects and everything else. But equally, that whatever we provide them with meets the Department of Agriculture biohealth requirements and everything else. We do not want to be importing seeds from other countries that perhaps be harmful within our own environment. So having an active engagement with the local authority is very, very important in that. And then just on a final thing, as a residents association, we've always tried our best to take care of our environment, and we have annual cleanup days, etc., where neighbours get involved in it. And for example, where you see road signs, we have planted them over the years, etc. We come out every year, we tidy up the whole place, we do a complete clean, we cut back bushes and trees and everything else. We hope that we can change that in a slight way, so that what we're actually doing is integrating biodiversity activities into that estate cleanup type activity. And hopefully we will continue to push this with the council, and it will be a slow project. It's going to take a number of years to bed down properly, but that perhaps Temple Manor Wilkins Residents Association can be used as a model for other urban communities to create something in their own areas. Thanks.
Ian, thanks so much. That's a really great example. I'm going to ask Charlie to get his slides ready, and I'll just share the results there of our last poll. So we seem to have people some people have read the Climate Action Plan, but quite a majority have not. So that's very interesting. We'll have to consider that for Climate Action Week. Maybe one of the big actions is to read the plan. I'm going to get Lorna to maybe put the last poll while Charlie's getting ready. Okay, so the question is, what actions are you taking for climate change for pollinators? So we've given a few there that you might be doing. And we're just interested to see what you're really at. And we'll just wait for Charlie now. And if we can ask you to quickly put your answers in, then we'll finish with the final presentation there. Okay. That's great. That's great. I think Charlie seems to be ready now. So final answers on the poll, please, because I have to end it now so that Charlie can proceed. Okay. Will we end it? I think. Oh, a couple last minute Joes. Okay. Are you good to go, Charlie? Are you unmute, please?
Sorry, yeah, sorry, Marianne. Yes, I'm good to go. I just had one.
You're good to go. Okay. Thank you. Fire away.
Okay. Well, yeah, my name's Charlie Heasman. I'm here with my wife Marion sitting beside me, and we're both members of Sustainable Skerries, and we're working on a biodiversity action plan for the town. Right from the start, this was going to be pollinator centric, if that's a word. It still is. But in the meantime, we discovered a rare bee, the large carder bee, previously alluded to. And so we've tailored our plan specifically to help this bee. Not to say we're excluding everything else, of course we're not, because if you help one, you help the other. But with an opportunity to do just that. And I think you should be seeing on your screens a rather exotic looking photograph of the bee in question. This was actually taken on the South Strand in Skerries, believe it or not. So on next, right. That was the bee. Confusion species. Well, here on the left, we've got the common carder bee. This is very easy to see. It's a common bee. This is one you're always going to see. The one on the right is again another photograph of the large carder bee. You've got to be looking in the right place at the right time, and you'd be lucky to see this one, to be honest. But anyway, there she is. And where's it found? Right, well, basically Northwest Europe. You can see all the little yellow dots on the screen there, all around Norway, Scandinavia. And you can see that it favours coastal areas. The second thing that you can see is that the British Isles is a bit of a relative hotspot for it, including Ireland. So if I go on to the next slide and zoom in further, here we have Ireland. And yeah, all those little purple squares are recordings of the large carder bee since 2000, I think. And again, you can see coastal areas predominate. And in fact, Dublin, County Dublin, I'm told, is a pretty good area to find the bee. And here we are in County Dublin. So I'm going to zoom in even further into Skerries. Right. Before I say anything about the slide, what actions can we take? Well, the most obvious one is more nectar, more pollen, more flowers. That's a bit of a no-brainer. But apart from that, this slide shows where we've recorded the carnaby. We have here the South Strand, Skerries. Skerries allotments, it's found here. I've got high hopes for this place. Here we have something called the ballast pit, which is a disused gravel quarry, if you like, quite flower rich. We have a small colony here near to the Educate Together school, which I'll come back to. And in fact, Marion and myself recently found it finally in our Gibbon Park. So that was a sort of purpose there as well. I think this one here on the end of the harbour, I think we can probably dismiss either as data entry error or someone saw a bee once that got blown off course. But we've got these areas and they're all small fragmented populations. So what we must do is join them up together by means of biodiversity corridors. And this here, the ballast pits, Educate Together school all the way up to our government. Oh, and incidentally, just here, Fingal are in the process of putting in a wildflower meadow. In the meantime, we've got the ballast pit. We've got the Educate Together school here, and they've come well on board with our scheme. They've been fantastic, and we've established or started a wildflower meadow in the school grounds. So this red line that I've rather shakily drawn on here represents a main road through the town with a wide grass verge, lends itself perfectly to the job. We're talking with Fingal being really good. This is going to be our main biodiversity corridor. The South Strand here is a lot more difficult to join up with everything else because we've got lots of housing in the way. And this is where private gardens and will come into it. And if people will join the scheme and plant pollinator friendly in their gardens, that's going to be fantastic. And in fact, the whole scheme relies on cooperation between everyone, Fingal County Council, as Brian mentioned earlier there, schools, sports clubs, private gardeners. So I'll just finish off with a quick couple more slides of what we've actually got at the moment. That is the South Strand in Skerries in June, July. I think we probably all agree that's fairly flower rich and natural, by the way. This is a corner of the ballast pit. You can see lots of orchids there and wildflowers and all the rest of it. I think you can also see a photo-bombing butterfly there as well. But yeah, another flower-rich habitat that we've already got and which needs protecting. This is a corner of our wildflower meadow in the Educate Together school. We only started it this time last year. And basically what you're seeing there is grass that's been mown like all other grass up until this year and then just been left unmown for the summer. And that is what came up. I think that's quite incredible actually. And that is all natural self-offering wildflowers. And my very last slide, as I said about pollinator friendly gardening, I wish everyone would do what this chap's doing. It's not a big garden, it's only small, but he's packed it full of stuff. And oh, and incidentally, this photograph was taken in October, so it just goes to show that you know, how effective this can be visually as well as for the insects. And well, I guess that's about us from us. So Charlie and Marion signing off from Skerries and returning you to the studio.
Charlie, thanks for those great pictures. I was nearly going to say to you, time's up, but they're so gorgeous, I had to watch. Those are great images of the evidence of what you can do in a small space. You don't need a massive meadow, right? Let's share the results just really quickly of our last poll. So here's what everybody in our audience today is doing for climate change for pollinators. So most popular thing, Charlie, planting. So I hope you're planting now the way Una suggested, and with the guidance. And then the other thing that people are doing is mowing less often. So they're taking on board that key principle there. And then providing water in your garden, which is really important for wildlife generally. So that's great that people are actually providing different habitats and different areas. And then the least favorite option is converting paved areas to green spaces. And that is tough, especially in an urban area when you're trying to get your car in and find space to park and things. But maybe we could just take up a few patio slabs. You never know. So I'm going to stop sharing and we'll go to questions. There's questions come in from the audience, but I have a few questions if you don't mind, real quick. I might hit you guys up with a few questions here. Charlie, we'll start with last first, okay? So in terms of your group, Sustainable Skerries, and trying to develop networks with other communities and trying to, expand this out for large Carterby, are you planning to do this, and kind of, how do you see that evolving?
Well, when we started this for Skerries, we thought we'd taken on a fairly big job. We seem to be getting somewhere. But what has been very encouraging is Fingal County Council are inviting all Tidy Towns groups. I think there's 27 in total. To formulate their own biodiversity plans, and then subject to approval, Fingal will then bankroll that. Or, and quite a lot of those groups have actually come to us and said, "Oh, well, what's all this about this large Carterby? What are you doing? What can we do if we got it?" Blah, blah, blah. We've had a web event and this, that, and the other. And if some of these groups come together, and you get the likes of Rush, Portmarnock, whatever. That would be absolutely incredible. Just earlier on in the week, we attended another one of these climate action events, open air one of what used to be the Levy landfill and is now Rogerstown Park. And I could see the stuff that Fingal are doing out there. I'm well impressed with it. I've got an idea or two how we might slip in a bit of Carterby, large Carterby friendly stuff in there as well. So, if we get that on going. And just lastly, I know that Una is watching us, seeing what we're up to in Skerries, hoping we can succeed, and in which case it could serve as template or inspiration to other communities about the island of Ireland.
Yeah, I really want to thank you and Marion for sharing your experiences today. And it is very inspiring, the messages you're giving and the examples you're giving to people, that people can make small gestures, but incrementally, it all adds up and you get these networks going. I might, on that note, I might just ask Breen a question, just to kind of give a look at what's going on south side. So just in terms of this idea about the underused green spaces, Breen, and their potential for increasing biodiversity, and this whole issue about whether green spaces are really being used, how do you, as a residents group, decide these areas to focus on? Do you look at things like vandalism, or how do you get consensus on the use of these areas and whether they need to be repurposed this way?
Well, I think the word you use there, consensus, is very important, because if you have to have consensus among the community to move any of these things forward. And we actually sought that out from the community. We came up with our plan and we circulated it to all the residents and invited their feedback. And the feedback that we got was, it was incredibly popular, and it was positive. A lot of what we're looking at in terms of unused areas, there is agreement generally on it anyway. People can actually see that these places, nobody uses them. There's a small green, for example, in the estate, which highlighted in orange. Literally nobody uses that at all. So nobody had a problem when we came up with the proposal of, maybe, look, we will allow that to be rewilded. Now, our proposal, by the way, in terms of rewilding, was actually to create this layered approach across that small green. Maybe perhaps put it in a small little crab apple orchard, have a living wall of hedgerow around it instead of the grey walls we have, and then not cut it. But again, I mentioned the fact of this idea of having appropriate signage so that people know what it is. And I think that helps. But consensus has never been an issue for us, because once we discussed the matter with the residents and provided them with the information, and they could see what it was that we were actually trying to achieve on a longer term, they could see the benefits for themselves. And they could also see the benefits that they would have if they were in a position themselves, if we could source plants and seeds for them to use in their own gardens. And they could see that these two wild issues and garden issues would interact with each other to create a better overall environment for pollinators within our estate.
So actually there's some questions coming from the audience that actually pick up on some of those topics. So maybe before I come to Emer and Una with mine, I might like to actually have a look at them and put them to you, okay? So there's a question here actually from Craig about this. So when we talk about these underused spaces, right, these tend to have illegal dumping and this type of thing. So I might just ask the panel overall, because Emer, you would also probably have this with TII sites. Does rewilding have any noticeable impact on illegal dumping? Have you observed this in any of you, Brian, Charlie, Emer, or Una?
Well, I'll just say that I think it's, as Brian was saying, it's really important that you know, even if a small element of signage, or we would cut maybe a small area around the edge of these spaces to show that there is actively something happening in the spaces. And I think even those small ways of communicating what you're doing can mean that if there is a tendencies for illegal dumping, you have more eyes on the streets, more people who take ownership of these spaces. So, but I know I've just finished judging this year's Tidy Towns competition, and there has been an increase in some communities in illegal dumping in some areas because we've all been so contained within our local areas. But on the flip side of that, there have been so many people, as Brian was saying, who have just had a huge amount of appreciation for their own areas, and these areas that were seen as waste, if we can kind of tell groups of people in residents associations that actually they're not waste ground, these are incredibly important biodiversity areas, you can then get ownership and eyes on the street, and I think that's one way to help address it.
Brian, you want to come in there too? Yeah, thanks, Emer, that's great.
Yeah,
that's
no, absolutely. Obviously, because we're in an urban setting and in the state, there wouldn't tend to be any problem with illegal dumping. But I think it's worth mentioning that one of the things that we have noticed and we've had to try and address is that we have seen when some people have cut their front or back gardens, that they have used some of the unused space to dump their grass cuttings up against the wall. And we've had to discourage that. It's actually hugely problematic when people do this, because you're actually creating an ideal environment and habitat for rats and other rodents within the estate. And people were actually very much unaware that they were creating problems for themselves by doing this. They thought it was perfectly acceptable to just dump their grass cuttings, but we've had to try and educate people about that.
But I suppose that's all a learning curve, and it helps people see you as a resource now they can come to for information too. Maybe they just needed that type of resource. Maybe there's a question here from Niall McAvoy. He says, I think that the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan is a fantastic initiative, has raised awareness and has several positive outcomes already. However, I am aware of some instances in Fingal County Council where managing sections of land for pollinators had an adverse impact on Brent geese. Presumably this is because the grass is not being cut anymore in an area where the geese might have fed on the grass and they need the grass cut. How can we balance the needs of different species? Is there a holistic way of managing this in councils or countrywide? Una, do you want to maybe take that question?
Yeah,
from an overall perspective.
Yeah, and it's a good point. And I suppose just to say up front that when we developed the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan and the new version, we've always really carefully tried to make sure that this isn't going to happen. And we have engaged really closely with lots of other organisations and NGOs in this sector to try to make sure that the advice that we provide doesn't have any detrimental effects on other elements of our biodiversity. I think it's back to, you know, a lot of what we've been talking about here is education, you know, and like we would say, you know, have your long flowering meadows, but you're cutting them so that the grass is short over the winter, you know, which would hopefully then, you know, not have that negative impact on things like brown geese. I suspect that maybe there's an element of specific engagement that has to go on at local levels where you do get these overlaps between species and it is causing an issue. But I suppose as I say, we do try to make sure that our advice isn't going to have any detrimental effects on anything else. But what I agree with, you know, with the person who's asked the question, you know, there's definitely an educational program that we need to roll out to make sure that that's not happening.
Yeah, I think there's complementarity with other biodiversity objectives, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. There's a quick question here that maybe the panel could just quickly answer for Robert. Is Bombus muscorum also known as the moss carder bee? And is its feeding range smaller than the other bumblebees?
Okay, I'll take that one. The answer is yes.
Thank you.
Yes, large carder bee, a moss carder bee, Bombus muscorum. It answers to all three names.
Okay, I'm just going to fire through a few more. Somebody here, Sarah, saying, would love to see more native pollinator-friendly perennials to be grown through the nursery stock sector, you know, here in Ireland. Any nurseries engaging in this? Anybody know of?
I can
And
just
without naming
answer.
names,
Is
that
happening?
names?
Yes, that is happening, which is really positive to see. So there are some Irish nurseries that are growing pollinator friendly perennials, particularly at the minute for the local authority sector. But we'd hope to, you know, as demand increases, these kind of things hopefully follow through. So it's fantastic to see it is happening. I hope it, you know, it continues.
And I can just say, Marianne, as well, and certainly in terms of tidy towns, there's been a huge switch away from, you know, begonias and ornamental summer flowerings to perennials, and the understanding that as Charlie's brilliant photograph shown, you can get colour for ornamental through perennial and through native nectar-rich plantings. So I think that message is getting through as well, which will affect its supply and demand. So if local groups or local authorities understand this change, there won't be as much of a demand for the commercial bedding plants.
Yeah. So as an industry, and I think as consumers, we all have a responsibility there to try to buy things that you know, to put our money where our mouth is. Okay. Ricky, just a compliment there from Ricky to Brian in his excellent presentation. He's trying to do something along the same lines. He wishes you well, and I think we'll probably try and put some of these through Caro up for people just as a reference. So thanks, Ricky, for that. Keith has said, Dr. Mike Ryan from the WHO is saying we're pushing nature to its limits. You know, we're stressing the environment. So to everybody, if you could do one thing policy-wise, if you could introduce something as a policy today, starting today, what would you introduce and why? And then just real quick answer, please, because we don't have a few more questions. We'll start with Emer.
I would take neat and tidy, even though it's in the tidy towns, to get that out of maintenance programs so that we understand that nature is wild and it is sometimes untidy, and that's a good thing.
Mightn't call it tidy anymore, so.
Well, yeah, there's been a lot of discussion on that, but it's yeah.
Okay, we won't get into all the politicking right now, but okay, thanks. Charlie, what would you do? You're writing the policy starting today.
Well, actually, I want to agree with exactly what Emer just said there. There is, I don't know if you can call this policy, but well, yeah. I mean, it's changing people's perceptions. Nature is, by its very nature, not as neat and manicured as everyone has come to expect their lawns and public places. So it's a big thing, changing people's attitudes. Fortunately, it is happening. You know,
so maybe a bit more invested in the education piece and trying to maybe a bit of PR as well, or trying to get the message out, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, which is why people get involved in webinars such as this, you know, to try and get the message across.
Yeah. Brian, what would you do? What would you do? What would be your thing?
I think I'd have to look at the agricultural sector and change what's happening there. I think there's a huge over-intensification in terms of the beef and dairy herd. I would prefer to see that we set aside agricultural land and allow it to be rewilded. Literally do
Okay.
nothing. Don't go in and plant trees. Don't go in and plant wildflowers. Just leave them, let nature take its course. Nature will always be faster than any man-made intervention.
So to take Mike Ryan's point, just to wrap this up, because we're running late on time here, instead of pushing nature to its limits, back off nature a bit, back off with the intensification.
Yeah, entirely.
Yeah. Una,
And
do you want to answer that?
if anybody, by the way, wants a copy of the submission we made to South Dublin County Council, they can just contact the organisers and we'll pass it on.
Great. Una, you're already writing some policy. Do you want to say anything on that, or before I wrap up? Or
yeah, there's loads of things I'd like to see, but I'll give you one really small specific one. There's other countries in Europe that have, it's called a roadside decree, where you're not allowed to cut roadside birches before a certain date. I think it's sometime in June, which means that no one's allowed to do it. Everyone gets used to it. You know, these birches can grow, provide food for pollinators and other biodiversity. I'd love to see something like that.
So that's the Wildlife Act, really, isn't it? It has to be maybe amended, I think. Okay, so I'm going to just on that note, I had loads of questions, but I'm going to park them for now. I might drop you an email. I'm going to just remind everybody where to get information is the Dublin Climate Action Week website that we've already put up there in the chat for you. And we still have events running all through this weekend. So if you hadn't had time this week, now's your chance to try and sign up for. We've still plenty of places left on different things. And there's films and things like that that you can book with. Before I go, I just want to kind of maybe ask our panelists, do you think that events such as Climate Action Week are key to this initiative, or how do you see Climate Action Week with the Pollinator Plan? Just before we finish up, just one quick question I wanted to ask you. Maybe Emer, you could go first.
I'm afraid I was writing an answer to your question, so I didn't hear what you said. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, just in terms of Climate Action Week, and do you think this is key to some of these initiatives, and in terms of trying to link it to climate action?
Yeah, I think the whole nature-based solution, climate action, everything is so interlinked. I was just answering a question about the Tidy Towns points allocation that has sustainability, biodiversity. They all link together, and really, it's so hard to differentiate them. So an action in one for climate change, it will have positive actions all the way around. So the more we can do in every sector, I think it brings us closer to the end goal, which we're aiming for.
Yeah, and Charlie, did you want to say anything there about climate action locally?
Yeah, no, sorry, Marianne. I was, please excuse me, I was reading the Q&A on the chat.
Yeah, no problem. I know there's lots of compliments coming in, so you might as well indulge in reading them. I won't put you on the spot. It's okay. Did anybody else want to come in on that before we close up for Climate Action Week in terms of the need for climate action on pollinators?
Yeah. I'd say something. Just I think these type of events are very important. We need to inform our decision makers, whether they be in government, whether they be in local government, or whatever. And that is best done when people come together and talk and discuss and share ideas, so that information and that message can get to those who need to understand that we have to do this, and who have the power to actually action some of the things that we'd like to see happen.
Well said, I think. Una, did you want to come in? I
think Brian said that so well that I shouldn't say anything else on top. I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, I won't top that either. Charlie, did you want to say anything there just now that you're back?
Yeah, just as I said, I was reading the Q&A and the chat on that. People are asking some pretty decent questions. Listen, if anyone wants to know more about what we're up to, and this, that, and the other, large carnaby, or wildflower meadows, this, that, and the other, my contact details are freely available. If anyone wants to Google sustainable scaries, they can find us, and I'd be quite happy to talk to anyone. I love talking about this sort of stuff to people. So yeah, okay, people, don't be shy.
Great. Thank you very much to all of our wonderful speakers today and for putting the time in to give those presentations and put them all together. And thanks to all who attended for spending your lunch hour with us and giving some time and thought, and your thoughtful questions really helped make the session. So hats off to everybody for their various levels of participation. And please do check the Climate Action Week website for more information on what you can do. And